Welcome back to Scripture Horror. Tonight we dive straight into the darkest corners of America's open highways with SIX unsettling trucker horror stories. Each one is more disturbing than the last. These accounts come directly from veteran drivers who have spent years crossing the most deserted stretches and the most isolated miles of this country. What you're about to hear isn't fiction or roadside rumor. These are real experiences told by the very truckers who lived through moments of pure, unexplainable fear while on the job. To protect the privacy of those involved, a few names have been altered, but every core detail remains exactly as it was described. If you're new to Scripture Horror, make sure to subscribe for nightly true horror content that will leave you checking your mirrors long after the engine's off. Tap the notification bell so you never miss an episode, and if you or someone you know has endured a terrifying trucking encounter, share it in the comments below. Your story could help others understand the real dangers that truckers face every single day. I was driving an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, heading toward a destination somewhere in Arizona. I think I was delivering appliances, though honestly the details of the job feel blurry compared to what came afterward. What I do remember clearly is the darkness. It wasn't the usual highway darkness. This was pitch black, endless, suffocating darkness stretching in every direction with nothing but faint outlines of distant hills and empty sand. It felt like the kind of darkness your eyes have to fight just to process. The headlights on my semi were unusually dim that night. They had been fading for a while, and I kept putting off getting them fixed because money was tight. Most nights I could ignore it, but out there, with no street lights, no reflective signs, and barely any other vehicles to keep my depth perception grounded, it became painfully obvious how weak they really were. Every few minutes I found myself leaning forward, squinting, trying to make out the road ahead. It felt like I was driving blind, guiding a massive machine through a void. That alone could have been its own horror story. I debated pulling over and waiting for sunrise. It would have been the smart thing to do, but I desperately needed every hour I could work, every mile I could squeeze out of my shift. So I pushed on, convincing myself that the road was mostly a straight shot and that I'd be fine. The desert can trick you like that, make you think you're in control when you really aren't. It must have been about an hour before sunrise when I saw something in the distance. A shape. A glow. Something reflecting faintly against my dim headlights. Whatever it was approaching fast. Or maybe I was approaching it. I wasn't thinking clearly enough to tell. My first thought was that it might be some animal wandering across the road. Coyotes, stray dogs, larger animals. They pop out when you least expect it. Worried about hitting something, I slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched violently, and when I finally came to a stop, I realized exactly what I was looking at. A car. Parked dead center in the lane, not near the shoulder. Not angled, not pulled over. It was sitting perfectly on the double yellow line, as if someone had intentionally stopped exactly there. The hazards were clicking softly, flashing in the darkness. And the passenger door was wide open, hanging there like an invitation I absolutely didn't want. My truck had stopped maybe a foot before hitting it. One more second, and I'd have plowed straight into it. I remember sitting there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of the situation. I'm a pretty fearless guy, been in enough bar fights to know I don't scare easily. At first, I wasn't nervous. Just confused. Maybe someone broke down and panicked. Maybe they pulled over in the worst possible spot and wandered off. My brain went straight to practical explanations. Curiosity won out. I reversed the semi just enough to pull over near it. I thought about tossing out a few flares, but I hadn't seen a single car for hours, so I figured there wasn't much point. Besides, I just wanted to check the situation quickly and move on. When I stepped out of my truck, the first thing I noticed was the silence. A warm desert night is usually full of at least some sound, insects, distant movement. But that night was still. Completely still. No breeze, no rustling, no shifting sand. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic clicking of the hazard lights. That tiny noise felt deafening in the emptiness. The car was a new-looking red Ford Fusion. Clean, shiny. Not the kind of vehicle you'd expect abandoned in the middle of a desert highway. I approached cautiously, circling around the open passenger door. I leaned inside, looked around, and froze. It was empty. Completely empty. I checked the back seat, checked the footwells, leaned further in to make sure no one was slumped or hiding. Nothing. No bags. No belongings. No signs of a struggle. Just an empty car with its hazards on and a door wide open. The uneasiness hit me all at once. It felt like every instinct I had suddenly started screaming. I glanced behind me, then to the left, then the right. I couldn't see far because of my weak headlights, and the desert darkness made it feel like anything, or anyone, could have been standing just beyond sight. I kept whipping my head around, expecting something to move. I tried to calm myself, told myself someone might have gone to look for cell service or maybe wandered off in confusion. I forced myself to keep investigating because walking away felt worse. The key was still in the ignition, though the engine was off. That detail made my stomach twist. Who leaves their keys in the ignition with the door open in the middle of a desert? I got out and moved toward the trunk. If someone needed help, maybe they stored tools or supplies back there. Maybe the trunk would give me a clue. I tried to lift it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. So I grabbed the key from the ignition, unlocked it, and tried again. Still jammed, like something inside was holding it down. I opened the back door, reached in, and felt around the back seat toward the trunk, and to my surprise, it opened. Just a small gap, but enough to see inside. There were 3 squished garbage bags and a length of rope tying the trunk shut from the inside. I remember hesitating. My whole body felt tight. Something deep inside me warned me not to touch anything. But I was already too far in, already committed to understanding what I'd found, so I leaned in a little farther. I must have been inches away from reaching for one of the bags when the loudest gunshot I'd ever heard blasted through the night. The sound was so violent and so close that I slammed my head on the roof of the car. My entire body jolted with pure shock. I didn't think. I couldn't think. Instinct took over. I dropped the keys onto the front seat without meaning to and scrambled out of the car as fast as my body could move. As I climbed into my semi, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking the truck with it, I heard a voice in the distance. A rough, grungy voice, yelling. Repeating, "Hey, hey," over and over, and the sound was getting closer. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I fired up the engine. I stalled for a second. Of all the times my truck could hesitate, it had to pick that moment. I cursed out loud, slammed the gear shift, and finally felt the engine kick in. And then I saw him. Standing at the trunk of the Ford. A short, husky guy. Red hair. Overalls. Shin-high boots. In his left hand he held a small shovel. In his right, pointed downward but undeniably real, was an old hunting rifle. Our eyes locked for just a moment as my truck rolled past. He didn't look wild or deranged or frenzied. He looked worried, almost desperate. But that didn't make me feel any safer. He dropped the shovel and started waving his arms, yelling for me to wait. Over and over. I didn't. Not for a second. I floored it, pushing the semi harder than I should have. I drove for several minutes before I even dared to glance in the mirrors. When I finally did, adrenaline crashed through me. Headlights. Coming fast. He was following me. I grabbed my phone and called the police, stumbling through the story as best I could while trying not to lose control of the truck. The car behind me honked again and again, long, angry bursts that echoed over the empty road. I prayed he wouldn't ram me. My mind kept replaying the image of that rifle. For several agonizing minutes he stayed right on my tail. Then he cut in front of me and slammed on his brakes. I nearly crashed into him. I braced for something horrible. But then, flashing lights, a patrol car up ahead. The Ford jerked to the right and sped off into the open desert before the officer could even reach us. The car vanished into the darkness like it had never been there. I pulled over, shaking hard. The officer spoke to me, calm as can be, and insisted on getting my report instead of going after the guy. I told him twice that they could still catch him if they went now. He didn't budge. He promised a thorough search once backup arrived and sent me on my way. They never called with an update. None of my buddies have a story like this, and I've told it more times than I can count. People always jump to the same conclusion, that the man was burying bodies. But that doesn't explain the tiny shovel, the small bags, or why he chased me so desperately. Some of my friends think he dismembered someone. Maybe. Maybe not. For my own sanity, I choose to believe he was burying dead animals or something else I don't want to picture too clearly. All I know for certain is this: I've never felt fully comfortable driving through desert highways at night ever again. I don't know if you've seen the modern videos truckers post online, those little clips where we document our routines, joke about the road, or trade tips with each other. Maybe you haven't. But being on the younger side of this industry, every time I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's all that shows up. I won't get into the content itself, but I will say this: I had to drop out of a pretty prestigious university because of some personal reasons, and people still tell me I could have been more than a trucker. Truth is, trucking isn't that bad of a gig. I've been making deliveries for years now, and the work isn't really what gets to you. It's the isolation. Long hours alone do something to your mind. You can never guess how deeply the solitude will dig into your subconscious until you've experienced it yourself. If I have any advice for anyone thinking of starting this career, it's this: make peace with whatever demons you've got hiding inside. Because out here, in the empty hours, the quiet will drag them out. That's what happened to me. This all happened months after I got employed by my first company. I was basically as new as someone in this trade could be. My route was from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a drive that normally takes around hours. And maybe that doesn't sound horrible, but remember this: I had just completed another hour trip before starting this one. That should put everything into perspective. I wanted the deliveries done as quickly as possible, so I chose to push through the night. If everything went smoothly, I'd get to Lafayette just before a.m. and, at first, everything was smooth. The highway was dead, barely another car in sight, and I could push the truck a little faster than usual. Somewhere around the halfway point of the drive, I reached into the center console for a Red Bull. My hand closed around nothing but empty space. I opened the compartment fully, patted the surrounding areas, checked the cup holder. Nothing. It hit me. I had forgotten to restock my drinks after finishing the previous delivery. I slapped the dashboard a few times and groaned in frustration. I hated stopping during a drive more than anything. Maybe I'm weird, but whenever my vehicle isn't moving, even if I stop for seconds, my fatigue skyrockets. The moment the wheels stop, my brain starts shutting down. But after glancing up at the navigation screen, I realized I didn't have a choice: stay on the road and risk falling asleep behind the wheel, or stop somewhere and grab an energy drink. Those options were more equal than they should have been. Still, I forced myself to pull into the first service stop I saw. The moment I parked, I realized too late this wasn't really a service stop. It looked more like an abandoned gas station and a repurposed convenience store slapped together. Not exactly comforting. There was another quick stop a little further up the road, though, and if this one turned out to be closed, I'd just go there. I parked the semi and walked toward the first store. Honestly, I expected one of two things. Either the place would be open or the door would be locked. Simple. You can imagine my surprise then when the door swung inward as soon as I pulled it. The store was pitch black. No lights, no buzzing fluorescents, nothing. Just a silent, dark space. I stepped inside anyway, hoping maybe I'd get lucky and find a leftover drink or snack someone forgot to toss. But the deeper I got, the more I felt like I shouldn't be there. Just as I was about to turn back, my eyes adjusted enough for me to notice a faint glow coming from the back corner of the room. It wasn't bright, just a low, steady bluish light. Curiosity overpowered common sense, and I walked toward it. Turned out the glow was coming from a small back room. The door was cracked open, and inside was a refrigerator plugged into the wall. The light inside was flickering slightly, casting weird shadows across the empty room. I felt a surprising wave of relief. Maybe this place wasn't as abandoned as it looked. Maybe someone had just forgotten to take down the signage or something. I pulled the fridge door open eagerly and froze. It was empty. Completely, utterly empty. Not a single item on the shelves, because there were no shelves. The entire appliance had been gutted. Just a hollow shell with a working light inside. It made no sense. As I pushed the door to close it, I heard a sound, a sharp clatter from the main room, something small hitting the floor. My blood iced. I stopped moving, holding my breath so deeply my chest hurt. Was that real? Had I imagined it? I waited a good seconds before I worked up the courage to step back into the dark main room. I scanned every corner, every outline, every shadow. Nothing. No one. but there was a sinking feeling I couldn't shake, like I had wandered into something I shouldn't have. I didn't have time for this. I hurried out the entrance door and practically jogged to the other store up the road. Thankfully, that one was open. I bought my drink, thanked the cashier probably too fast, and hurried back to my truck. Something about the whole stop felt wrong, like I had brushed up against danger without realizing it. I just wanted to get back on the road. Before climbing into the truck, I gave one last glance toward the abandoned store. My stomach dropped. The door was open. I was 100% certain I had closed it behind me. Now it stood partially ajar, dark inside, silent, like it was waiting. It wasn't my problem, though. I wasn't about to investigate. I climbed into the semi, shut the door firmly, and pulled back onto the highway. The caffeine kicked in quickly, snapping me out of the fog I'd been driving through. My thoughts raced. The whole thing had been bizarre, sure, but maybe it wasn't that strange. Buildings get abandoned, squatters break in. The fridge could have been stolen for scrap metal or parts. But no matter what explanation I tried to give myself, the feeling inside my chest didn't loosen. Something about that gutted refrigerator gnawed at me. I told myself to forget it. Focus on the road, deliver the load. Go home. That's when I noticed movement. Not outside, not on the road. Behind me. The curtain separating the cab from the sleeper area was shifting, billowing slightly, folding inward, then slowly bouncing outward like someone was breathing behind it. The air wasn't on. The windows were up. There was no draft. I stared at it in the rearview mirror, my mouth going dry, sweat prickling along my forehead. Every thought, every fear funneled into a single horrifying conclusion. Someone was in my truck. I didn't have weapons. Nothing to defend myself. I forced my breathing to stay quiet, grabbed my phone as discreetly as possible, and typed in the nearest police station. The route popped up. It wasn't 4 minutes. Minutes that felt like an eternity stretching ahead of me. My hands trembled on the wheel. Every few seconds, I checked the mirror again, half expecting a face to peel the curtain aside and look back at me. Those minutes were the longest, most gut-clenching of my life. I kept imagining a hand reaching out, a knife flashing. Someone grabbing me, choking me, crashing the truck. My imagination warped every sound, every tiny shift of fabric. I could feel eyes on me, unseen, unblinking. When the police station finally appeared, glowing like salvation, I didn't stop at the parking lines. I pulled the semi as close to the entrance as possible, practically threw it into park, and ran. I burst through the doors, breathless, shouting that there was someone in my truck. In seconds, officers were sprinting outside. They surrounded the semi, weapons drawn. One of them gestured for me to follow. When I opened the back for them, I was sure I was about to see one person. Maybe a crazy hitchhiker. A thief. Anything. I wasn't prepared for what actually came out. The police dragged out 3 people. 3 homeless-looking adults, 2 men and 1 woman. Their clothes were rags layered with filthy blankets. Their faces were smudged with dirt, their hair tangled and greasy. But it was their expressions that terrified me. They stared at me like I had stolen something from them. Like I had interrupted something they weren't done with. One of the men clutched 2 switchblades. The police confiscated them immediately. None of them said a word. Not a single syllable. They just kept staring at me while the officers cuffed their hands, their eyes sharp and unblinking. I didn't know how long they had been in my truck. I didn't know how many stops earlier they had climbed inside. I didn't want to know what they had planned. And the worst part? I still have no idea what they wanted. And I don't think I ever will. My name is Kevin, and I've been a trucker for different companies for the better part of my adult life. At this point, everything about the job feels routine. Pick up the goods, verify every last item for accuracy, and deliver them as instructed. We don't get paid by the hour, so efficiency is everything. The faster you deliver, the more you earn. And for someone like me, who's been behind a wheel longer than most of these new recruits have even held a license, I like to think I can still outwork the young guns snapping these jobs up. But being efficient in trucking usually comes with a cost. For me, that cost has always been sleep. I've pushed myself to the absolute edge more times than I'd like to admit, running on fumes, caffeine, and whatever scraps of energy my body can conjure up. A few years ago, I was working for a warehouse based out of North Dakota. Anyone who's been there knows it's one of the flattest states in the country, which makes trucking a bit easier. Fewer hills, fewer sudden turns, long stretches of road where you can just settle into a rhythm. But the downside of that was a mindset the company drilled into us. Sleep less, drive more. Every lost hour of rest could mean losing a load and, ultimately, losing your job. It was one of those unspoken rules we all followed, even though we knew better. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May, the start of a new week, which meant the warehouse was scrambling to get as many shipments out as possible. More loads meant more work for me. I figured if I planned my route right, I could knock out a long-haul delivery into Montana in one shot, no stopping, no sleeping, just one clean run. I mapped everything out, made sure the load was secure, and hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination early the next morning. I pushed that semi harder than I should have, maybe 5 miles over the limit here and there, nothing crazy but enough to shave off time. Hours passed in silence, the kind of silence only a trucker knows, where the hum of the engine becomes the only sound keeping you company. By midnight, I could barely keep my eyes open. I remember rubbing at the crust in my eyelids, blinking hard, telling myself I only had an hour left in the drive. Just one more hour. I could handle that. My buddy Tristan had introduced me to smelling salts back when I first started trucking. They're basically crystals sealed in a tiny bottle, and one sharp inhale will jolt you awake like you've been electrocuted. Tristan warned me not to rely on them too much. They burn like hell, and supposedly too many hits back-to-back can be dangerous. I kept a bottle in my glove compartment for emergencies. And that night, I needed it. Bad. I cracked the bottle open, took a deep breath, and my head shot back instantly. The burn surged up my nose, and adrenaline blasted through my body like someone had flipped a switch. For a moment, I felt invincible, wide awake, focused. I hoped the jolt would carry me through the last hour. But a half hour later, exhaustion hit me all over again. My truck drifted into the shoulder, and the violent rumble jolted me awake. My heart pounded. I knew then that I was past the point of powering through. I needed to pull over. But the stretch of highway I was on was nothing but thick woods on both sides. Not a rest stop, not a gas station, not even a dirt patch to safely pull onto. I slowed down, scanning the roadside for anything. A turnout, a patch of gravel, anything. At that lower speed, my headlights spread wider and lit up more of the road. That's when I saw it, a purple dress, just lying there in the middle of the road. For a second, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. Exhaustion can trick your brain into seeing things. I blinked over and over, rubbed my eyes, even slapped my face lightly. But it was still there. A small purple dress, neatly laid out, like someone had carefully placed it there. Confusion replaced exhaustion. I rolled past it slowly, staring at it until it disappeared behind me. Looking back, that should have been a massive red flag. But exhaustion dulls your instincts, and at the time I was too drained to process it logically. Then, maybe 40 or 50 yards down the road, I passed a pair of shoes. Small ones, like something a young girl might wear. That's when unease crept into me. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. I kept driving, scanning both sides of the road, silently praying I'd find a safe place to pull over. My old man, David, was a deeply religious guy. I still carried his old cross in my pocket, and I remember clutching it tightly, asking him, begging him to get me through whatever this was. A bit further up, I saw more clothing scattered on the asphalt. This pile was bigger, more chaotic. When I slowed the truck and got close enough, I saw small shirts, tiny pants, dresses, clothing that clearly belonged to kids, multiple kids. I stopped the truck completely. A cold wave of panic washed over me. I stared at the clothing, my mind spinning. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly off. The woods were pitch black on both sides, the kind of darkness that swallows everything whole. I rolled the window down a crack and listened, but I didn't hear anything except the hum of my engine. After a long moment, I did the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. I stepped out of the truck. I still remember the sharp bite of the cold morning air on my face. It woke me up more than the smelling salts did. Every fiber of my being was on alert as I walked toward the pile of clothes. Up close, it was obvious. These were kids' clothes, and there were enough pieces for at least 2 or 3 children. Boys and girls both. I looked at the tree line, squinting into the darkness, trying to see anything, movement, a flashlight, a person. But the woods were just a solid black wall. My heart was hammering against my ribs. My head kept whipping from side to side, expecting something to jump out at any second. The fear felt heavy, like it was sitting on my chest. I decided this wasn't my business. Whatever was happening, I didn't have the tools, the backup, or the energy to deal with it. I turned back toward my truck. That's when I heard it, a crunch. Like someone stepping on a dry branch. It came from the left side of the road. I spun around instantly. Silence. I stood there, breath held, waiting. 5 seconds passed. 10. Then another crunch, this time from the opposite side of the road. My adrenaline surged. My survival instincts took over. I bolted for the truck. I sprinted like my life depended on it because in my gut, I felt like it did. I jumped into the seat, grabbed the door, and right before I slammed it shut, a child screamed, a blood-curdling, echoing scream that tore through the trees. I froze. It sounded young, too young. My hand hovered over the door handle. Every moral instinct I had screamed at me not to abandon a child. But every survival instinct screamed even louder that this was a trap. Before I could act, a second scream rang out. Identical. The same pitch, same length, same panic. Too perfect. Something clicked in my head. I turned the truck on. My headlights lit up a section of the woods. And that's when I saw them. 3 or 4 figures standing deep between the trees, barely visible. One of them held a large speaker. The moment my lights hit them, they ducked behind the trees like animals scattering. But I saw enough. They weren't rescuing kids. They weren't lost. They were luring me. Using fake screams. Using children's clothing. Using the dark and my exhaustion to pull me in. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at the spot where they'd disappeared. I grabbed my phone to call the police, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. Before I even dialed, something slammed against the side of my truck. I flinched hard. Someone had thrown something, maybe a rock, maybe something else, from the opposite side of the road. That was it. I was done. I floored the gas pedal, and the truck roared forward. As I sped down the road, I saw another figure on the opposite shoulder. He shouted something I couldn't make out, then hurled something that cracked my passenger side window. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even breathe right. The final hour of the drive was the longest of my life. I didn't think. I didn't look in the mirrors. I just drove in complete, trembling silence. When I finally reached my delivery point, I parked the truck, staggered into the sleeper cabin, and passed out instantly. I slept for 12 straight hours. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police in North Dakota. I reported everything, the clothing, the screams, the people hiding in the woods with the speaker. They told me they'd investigate and inform me of anything they found. They never called back. To this day, I still think about that night. About how stupid I was to get out of the truck. About how easily I could have been dragged into those woods and vanished. I still wonder what those people wanted, why they didn't rush me when they had the chance, and what would have happened if I'd gone looking for that child. In all my years as a trucker, with all the strange things I've seen on the road, nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever come close to the terror I felt that night in the middle of those dark, silent North Dakota woods. The highway at night was supposed to feel familiar, comforting even. I'd been driving trucks with my dad for years, riding in the passenger seat long before I was old enough to touch the pedals. He always told me, night roads tell the truth about a man. They show what daylight hides. I never understood what he meant until the night everything changed. We were hauling a light load through a remote stretch of highway, a place truckers called the Whisper Line. No lights. No towns, no signals. Just endless blacktop cutting through wide, empty land. It was the kind of road that made you feel like the world ended miles back, and you were driving deeper into something forgotten. Dad was quiet that night. Too quiet. Normally, he hummed old songs or pointed out constellations as we drove. But tonight, he kept his eyes locked on the mirrors, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. I noticed the way his jaw tensed every time our headlights revealed a curve in the road. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "Stay awake," he murmured. "And don't look back unless I tell you to." I frowned. "Why?" "What's behind us?" He didn't answer. I thought he was just tired, maybe stressed from driving too long without stopping. But then I saw it. A faint flicker in the mirror. A shape. Something following us. At first I thought it was a car with busted headlights, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. No vehicle moved like that. It didn't bounce with the road, didn't drift even a little. It just glided. "Dad," I whispered, "there's something." "I know," he cut in sharply. "Don't look at it. Don't acknowledge it." His voice wasn't angry. It was scared. Truly scared. I had never heard my dad sound like that. The thing stayed far enough back that I couldn't make out details, but close enough that I knew it was intentional. Every time we turned a corner, it appeared again. Same distance, same shadowed shape, same silence. Not a single flicker of headlights. Not one engine sound, just there. The air grew colder the longer it followed us. Not normal cold. This was the kind that crawled under your skin, settled in your bones, and refused to leave. The kind that made you feel like you'd been dipped in ice. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield even though the heater was blasting. Dad adjusted the rearview mirror, but he didn't dare look into it. "We're not stopping," he said. "No matter what happens." We drove like that for another hour. No words, just the steady hum of the engine and the weight of something watching us. My heart thudded so loud I swear it drowned out the tires. Eventually, we reached an old, half-abandoned truck stop. One of those tiny places that probably should have been shut down years ago. The sign flickered weakly, the lights inside dim and yellow. But it was the only spot for miles, and Dad needed fuel. When he pulled into the lot, I felt my stomach drop. There were no other trucks, no cars. No movement. Just the empty building and the shadow behind us, lingering at the edge of the road like it knew we'd stop. "We're going in," Dad whispered. "Stay close. And whatever you do, don't look behind the truck." He stepped out first, scanning the area, then motioned for me to follow. The air outside was even colder, biting against my skin. I kept my eyes ahead, but every instinct screamed that something stood just out of sight, waiting. Inside the truck stop, only one light flickered over the counter. The place smelled like stale coffee and dust. Dad grabbed a few energy drinks and paid without small talk, never taking his eyes off the door. When we walked back outside, I felt it instantly, like the air had shifted. Heavy. Watching. Dad put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't run. Don't look. Just get in the cab." We climbed in, locked the doors, and Dad started the engine. But as he shifted gears, something scraped against the metal trailer behind us. A long, slow, drag-like claws testing the surface. My heart hammered. "Dad, look forward," he snapped. "Hold still." Something thumped against the side of the trailer. Hard. The whole truck jolted. Dad floored the gas. The tires screeched as we tore out of the lot and back onto the highway. I couldn't help it. I looked into the side mirror. I shouldn't have. In the faint glow of the truck stop lights, I saw it. Something pale, long-limbed, clinging to the back of our trailer. Not human. Not animal. Its limbs bent wrong, too sharp like broken branches. Its face was just darkness. An empty shape except for its mouth, stretched too wide as it whispered something I couldn't hear. I tore my eyes away, breath shaking. Dad cursed under his breath. "You looked, didn't you?" I didn't mean to." "It knows you now." The thing crawled across the roof of the trailer, its limbs scraping against the metal as it moved. Every sound made my blood run colder. I felt it above us, heavy, deliberate like it was pacing. Then it started whispering. At first it sounded like static, faint and broken. But the more I listened, the clearer it became. My name. Over and over. Drawn out, taunting, like it had been waiting for me specifically. "Stop listening," Dad said through clenched teeth. "Block it out." I pressed my hands to my ears, but the whispers slid through anyway. Soft, slithering, inside my head rather than outside of it. Dad pushed the truck as fast as it would go. The engine roared, the wheels screamed against the asphalt, and the whole cab shook violently. But the thing held on. A sudden bang echoed above us, louder, sharper than before. Then another, like it was testing the roof, trying to find weak spots. I felt each impact like a shock wave. Then, without warning, the whispering stopped. The silence was worse. A deep thud hit the windshield, making me flinch. Something slid down the glass, long fingers leaving trails across it. The creature's face appeared inches from mine, its mouth twisting into something like a smile, its empty eyes boring into me. Dad swerved, yelling for me not to look. But I couldn't move. The thing stared at me like it was looking through me, memorizing me. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished, ripped backward by the wind as Dad swung the truck around a sharp bend. But I knew it wasn't gone. Dad kept driving until dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold. Only then did the air warm again. Only then did the whispers fade completely. When we finally pulled into a crowded truck plaza, Dad slumped forward, exhausted, letting out a shaky breath. "It didn't get in," he said softly. "We got lucky." He looked at me, then really looked at me. "But it saw you. It knows your face now." I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "What does that mean?" Dad didn't answer. He didn't have to. In the days that followed, everything felt wrong. Even at home, even in daylight, I felt eyes on me. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker in the mirror behind me, something pale, something out of place. Sometimes at night I'd hear faint tapping on the window or soft scratching at the door, and then the whispers returned. Not loud, not constant. Just enough. Enough to remind me. Enough to warn me. Enough to tell me that the road hadn't forgotten me, and neither had the thing that followed us through the dark. Now, every night, I lie awake listening to the quiet, knowing at any moment the whispers could start again, knowing that one day I'll hear my name, and this time I won't be inside a truck with my dad to protect me. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it came from. But I know this. Once it chooses you, it doesn't stop. It waits. It watches. It follows. And somewhere out there, beyond the empty highways and the long, silent miles, it's still looking for me. When I was younger and first riding shotgun with my mom, trucking seemed like the perfect life. My mom was my road teacher, kind, loving, patient. Just the two of us rolling across endless highways. The world outside could be loud and unpredictable, but inside the cab of our old rig, there was peace. Or at least, that's what I believed. Those early days on the road are still some of my favorite memories. The cab smelled like coffee and warm diesel, the kind of scent that settles deep in your bones. My mom always found little ways to make the long drives feel special. She'd let me sit by the passenger window with a book, and when we'd pull into a rest stop before sunrise, she'd warm up cookies on the dash. The idea was simple. We'd learn the world mile by mile, without the noise of a crowded school, without bullies or the chaos of kids I never fit in with. But then she signed me up for a new online trucking school program meant for kids of driver's classes you could take from the sleeper berth while your parent drove. It sounded great at first. A way to talk to other kids on the road, a way to follow a structured curriculum. There were live sessions with real instructors, and that's when things began to twist into something I still wish I could forget. The first session went smoothly. I remember the instructor, Mr. Green, clear as day. He was an older guy, soft eyes, silver beard, the kind of smile that belonged behind the counter of a quiet diner at 3 a.m. His voice was calm, steady, like a familiar radio station you could always find no matter where you were on the map. He talked to us like we were old friends, and I felt a strange warmth whenever he spoke. But the comfort didn't last. Something started to feel off. Not all at once, more like a slow leak in a tire. In every session, the air around Mr. tried. Green felt still, too still. At first it was small things. The slight shift in his tone, the way he'd glance to the side of the screen like someone was standing next to him, just out of frame. I remember thinking maybe he had someone else in the room. Maybe it was nothing. But the unease settled in my chest, heavy, like bad weather on the horizon. And I wasn't the only one who noticed. The other kids got quieter too. Their eyes flickered around their screens like they were bracing for something they couldn't name. As the weeks rolled by, things only grew stranger, mile by mile, lesson by lesson. Then came one evening I'll never shake from my memory. We were parked at an isolated truck stop somewhere out west, my mom sleeping in the bunk while I took a late session from the front seat. Mr. Stand Green was talking about a math problem when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened. And he didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move. For a long, heavy moment, he stared into the screen like he was staring straight into me. His mouth opened, as if he were about to speak, but no sound came. It was like he had forgotten how. "Mr. Green?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper in the dark cab. He didn't answer. The screen froze. His face stuck in that awful, wide-eyed expression, and then everything went black. My heart hammered in my chest. I reached for the mouse with a shaking hand and refreshed the page. I thought maybe the Wi-Fi had cut out, maybe the session ended early, but when the screen flickered back to life, what appeared wasn't Mr. Starry. Green. It was a woman. Her face was pale, stretched wrong, as if someone had pulled the skin too tight. Her eyes bulged unnaturally, wide and glassy, catching the dim glow of my laptop's screen. And she grinned. A slow, unnatural grin that crawled across her face far wider than a mouth should. Her eyes locked onto mine, and a chill rolled through me so hard I felt frozen from the inside. I couldn't breathe. It felt like she was staring through the glass, through the wires, through the screen, straight into me. "She's not coming back," the woman whispered. Her voice was soft, too soft, like the hush of static on a midnight radio. But something about it felt wrong, like an echo rising out of a place far older than anything I could imagine. My body locked up. I couldn't move my fingers. Couldn't speak. Couldn't even look away. It felt like she was draining something from me just by holding my gaze. And then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. The screen blinked once, and there was Mr. Green again. Calm, smiling. As if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't disappeared, as if the woman hadn't existed at all. He continued the lesson in the same soft voice, his tone perfectly steady. Not even a mention of the interruption. The rest of that session slid past like a blur. I barely heard a word. My mind replayed the woman's face, her impossible grin, her whisper curling cold around my spine. Who was she? How had she gotten onto the session? What had happened to Mr. Stand? Green in that black screen gap? The next day, session time came again. My mom had pulled over near a quiet rest area. The sun was high, but it didn't make me feel safer. I sat in the passenger seat with the laptop open, dread pulsing inside me like a ticking clock. When Mr. Green's face appeared. At first he looked normal. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, during the lesson, he drifted off again. His eyes flicked to the side of the screen. Slowly, reluctantly. Like he didn't want to look but couldn't help himself. His face drained of color. He stared at something unseen, something just out of my view. His lips parted. And in a voice so faint I could barely hear it, he murmured, "They're still here." He swallowed. "They're not gone yet." That was enough for me. I slammed the laptop shut so hard the sound jolted my mom awake. She found me trembling, my breath short. I told her everything. The frozen screen, the woman, the whisper, the strange way Mr. Green kept glancing at something I couldn't see. She listened carefully, worry flickering in her eyes, but she tried to reassure me. She told me it had to be a glitch, a hacked video feed, some technical error. But I knew. Deep down, in the same place where old truckers sense bad roads before they see them, I knew it wasn't a glitch. I could still feel the woman's stare long after the screen had gone dark. The next session was the last one I ever joined. Mr. Green didn't show up. His profile had been erased, his name wiped clean from the list of instructors. The lessons continued with someone new, cheerful, and oblivious. But I never forgot the woman's face, or the way she whispered like she already knew something I didn't. Knew something I shouldn't have heard. Years have passed since that night on the road, but the memory hasn't faded. Not even a little. Sometimes, when I walk past someone using an online program, that familiar cold slips up my spine. I hear her words in the back of my mind, soft as distant static. I still wonder what happened to Mr. Green, what he saw beside his screen, why he whispered about them, and why the woman looked at me as if she were waiting for something. Was she a ghost? A warning? Something else entirely? I'll never know. But I will never forget the look in Mr. Green's eyes right before he disappeared, haunted, hollow, as if he were trapped in something far darker than any of us could understand. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the highway hums with low, unbroken sound, I can almost hear that soft whisper again. They're not gone yet. I've spent most of my adult life on the road. Long nights, empty highways, diesel fumes, and the low rumble of my engine were the only things that ever really felt like home. People think truckers get used to solitude, but the truth is, you never really get used to it. You just learn to live inside the silence. The kind of silence that follows you like a shadow, mile after mile. I guess that's why I always think back to the time before trucking, back when I was homeschooled, back when the quiet was all I knew. Homeschooling wasn't bad. If anything, it offered the only peace I ever felt as a kid. No crowded hallways, no loud voices, no eyes judging me from across a classroom. Just me and my mom in our small house tucked deep off a rural road. She was my teacher, my protector, and the only consistent thing in my life. But even she couldn't understand the one thing that made me different from other kids. I wasn't scared of being alone. I was scared of what waited outside. I didn't trust people. I didn't trust what they could do. And I definitely didn't trust what they thought they knew about me. So when my mom hired a woman named Mrs. Pro DPS Sinclair to help tutor me in the subjects she struggled with, I didn't know how to react. Mrs. Bitches. Sinclair came highly recommended, quiet, professional, polite. She walked with a kind of calm authority that made her seem wise but distant. I didn't know if I liked her. I didn't know if I trusted her. But my mom thought she was perfect, so I kept my mouth shut. At first, the tutoring sessions were normal. We'd sit at the kitchen table while the old wall clock ticked behind us. She'd explain math problems, help me break down reading assignments, quiz me gently on vocabulary. She was patient. Too patient, maybe. Because even though she seemed harmless, something about her unsettled me. Something I couldn't name. Like a shadow following her into the room, silent and wrong. The more we worked together, the more out of place she felt. The first time she asked me something personal, it didn't seem like a big deal. "What do you like to do when you're alone?" she asked, her eyes fixed on mine while my pencil shook above a fraction problem. I didn't know what to say. What did that have to do with math? Next time it was, "Do you ever hear things when you're by yourself?" Her voice was soft, almost soothing, but it didn't feel right. I stared at the paper, pretending not to hear, pretending I didn't feel her watching me like she could read my thoughts if she stared long enough. She didn't stop. She asked if I had friends. If anyone understood me. If anyone knew what made me different. The way she said it made my stomach twist. My mom was always close by, so I didn't say anything, but every session left me feeling more drained, more uneasy. Like she was slowly picking pieces of me apart and pocketing them. Then came the night everything changed. I was alone in the living room working through an assignment. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My mom had stepped outside to feed the animals. I remember hearing the gravel shift outside, followed by a knock at the door. Not a light knock. Not polite. Heavy. Firm. Like someone trying to get inside. I figured Mrs. Sinclair had arrived early. It wouldn't have been the first time. I walked to the door and pulled it open. But it wasn't her. It was the woman I'd been dreaming about. The one whose face hovered at the edge of my sleep for nights. Pale skin, wide, unblinking eyes, hair ruffled by the wind but not moving like normal hair should. She wore a long black coat that swayed even though the air was still. She didn't blink. She didn't speak at first. She just stared. When she finally opened her mouth, her voice felt like ice sliding down my spine. "Don't let them in." I froze, my hand tightening on the doorframe. My breath felt trapped in my throat. "What do you mean?" I whispered, not even sure my voice worked. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder, like she was searching the house for someone or something she didn't want to see. "Don't trust her," she said. And then she turned and walked away. Not rushed. Not frantic. Just gone. I shut the door slowly, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. I didn't tell my mom. I knew exactly what she'd say, that I imagined it, that it was a stranger, that I needed to get more sleep. But I knew what I saw. I knew that cold fear sinking into my bones wasn't imaginary. The next time Mrs. Passes Sinclair showed up, something was different. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her voice was too gentle, too controlled. When she asked questions, I felt like she was digging inside my skull, not trying to help me learn. She asked about my dreams, my fears, the kind of questions that made my chest tighten and my fingers numb. "Do you ever feel like you're being watched?" she asked once, her eyes locked on mine like she already knew the answer. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "You don't need to be afraid," she whispered. "Everyone has something watching over them. Even you." Those words stuck to me like cobwebs. During our next session, something happened that still sits heavy in my memory. As she walked me through an assignment, her hands trembled slightly. Not enough to call attention to, but enough for me to notice. And when I looked toward the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her reflection wasn't hers. It was stretched, distorted, wrong. Like someone had pulled her face into a shape a human face wasn't supposed to make. I blinked, and the reflection snapped back to normal. But my heart didn't. That night, I dreamt of her. Not the real her, the nightmare version. She stood in the doorway of our house, reaching toward me with long, pale fingers, her face empty. Her eyes bottomless. "Don't let them in," she whispered again. The same words from the woman at the door, the same voice echoing in my skull. I woke up drenched in sweat, and on my desk was a note. Neat handwriting, her handwriting. But it wasn't for me, it was for my mom. "She's closer than you think." I never saw Mrs. Sinclair again. She didn't show up for our next session, or the next. My mom didn't question it when I told her I didn't want tutoring anymore. She figured I wasn't ready. But I knew the truth. Something was wrong with her. Something I couldn't explain or even want to understand. Years later, when I got my first job long-hauling freight across the country, I thought the open road would wash those memories away. But it didn't. If anything, the long stretches of empty highway only reminded me of the quiet from my childhood. The kind of quiet where you swear something is sitting in the passenger seat even though you're alone. The kind of quiet where your eyes keep drifting to the side view mirror because you feel like you're being followed. I've had nights where the CB radio picks up whispers instead of voices. Nights where a figure stands on the shoulder of a deserted road, unmoving, watching my truck pass. Nights where I hear tapping on the sleeper cabin even when I'm the only living soul for miles. And sometimes, when I stop at a rest area late at night and the world falls silent, I see her. Not clearly, not close, but far away in the reflection of my truck window, a stretched figure. A pale face. Eyes that belonged to both Mrs. Sinclair and the woman from the door. I don't know if they were the same person. I don't know if she was warning me or watching me. I don't know what I was being prepared for. But I know one thing. That feeling, the cold, suffocating fear that someone is watching me from the dark, never left. It followed me onto the highway. And sometimes, when the road is empty and the night is too still, I hear her voice again. "Don't let them in.